This PowerPoint is titled The 30 Million Word Gap. By the end of the PowerPoint, you will know what that means and the importance of the information. It's common knowledge that numerous formal assessments are given to students of all ages in the United States. For some assessments, the data are separated into categories to compare the results of specific groups of students. The term achievement gap refers to the difference in academic performance between groups of students. Comparisons may be made between races, ethnicities, socioeconomic groups, genders, disabilities, and native English speakers versus English learners. The achievement gaps are demonstrated in graduation rates. In February of 2017, the following graduation rates by race were published for high schools in the Twin Cities. 87% of white students graduated from high school, 84% of Asian students, 65% of Hispanic students, 65% of Black students, and 53% of American Indian students. Minnesota has the largest gap between Black and white students and is of grave concern. If you follow this link, there is more detailed information about this gap. Minnesota ranks number 1 for having the highest ACT scores, but has nearly the worst graduation rate for African American students. There are numerous causes for this achievement gap between racial groups, and Minnesota is continually working to reduce the gap. However, this presentation will focus on a major cause of achievement gaps, and it is not linked directly to race. In the 1980s, Hart and Risley ran a clinic for preschoolers. They found that regardless of how much they worked with these young children, there were some that seemed to remain behind other students in their readiness for reading. Their practice in the clinic was consistent, so the only other variable that they could think about was what happened in the students' homes. They wondered how language experience for the youngest children might differ between homes. Beginning in 1983, Hart and Risley studied the role that families play in shaping their children's vocabulary size by studying the amount of words addressed to the child at home. They recruited 42 families from varying socioeconomic levels to participate. Low income, which typically meant less education and lower financial means. Working class, people with jobs that require less formal education and often make less money than families in the third group, the professional class, where there are typically higher levels of education and income. Participating families had children who were 1 to 2 years old when the study began. For 2.5 years, an observer visited their home 1 day every month and recorded with both audio recordings and written records every word spoken to the child and words spoken by the child. It's considered a landmark study because of the impact of the findings. After 2.5 years, the tapes were transcribed and notes by the observers filled in gaps where words were difficult to understand on the tapes. Hart and Risley then analyzed the data, and the findings were astonishing. They found there were wide differences in the amount of words and the quality of the words that were spoken to the children in the homes. The differences were correlated to the income levels of the families, not race, gender, etc. Although more of the lower-income children may be African American, the word gap is about socioeconomic status, not race. The word gap is one cause of achievement gaps. Hart and Risley's first document with the findings was titled The Early Catastrophe. They later wrote a book that detailed the full study titled Meaningful Differences. There's a lot of data, but it's a fascinating book to read. The following 2 slides clearly show the comparisons of the data. Children in professional families had the most language interactions, followed by working-class families, and finally children in low-income homes, which had many fewer conversations. In addition, the types of comments directed toward the children were vastly different. Children in professional families heard a higher ratio of encouraging statements compared to negative statements. Children from low-income families heard a higher ratio of negative statements compared to positive statements. This may be attributed in part to parents working low-paying jobs requiring them to work more than one job, stress caused by struggling to have enough money to cover needs, and other issues. Multiplied over weeks, months, and years, by age 3, some children in low-income homes heard 30 million less words, which directly affects language development. Language development also directly affects reading and comprehension abilities. Look at this chart. We can see that the achievement gap begins before children even begin preschool. As teachers, we may not have access to them, but we can do whatever we can to encourage families when we're around them. This chart shows the same information labeled in a different way. This chart extrapolates the data to 4 years old and the disparity between income levels and language development. When the data was analyzed, Hart and Risley found that there were different types of parent talk, which was actually any adults who were present during the monthly recordings. The first type of talk is business talk, often directions or tasks given to children to do, such as eat your dinner, brush your teeth, put on your coat, get your backpack. There was a comparable number of words between all socioeconomic groups in this type of talk. These aren't conversations, just statements or requests. The big differences in the number of words exchanged lie in what's labeled as extra talk. These are chatty conversations where the child is engaged. It's open-ended questions asked of the child, such as, "What do you think?" to encourage the child to express themselves, and are meant to extend the language exchange. These language exchanges are sometimes called language dancing. The data showed that 86% to 98% of the words recorded in each child's vocabulary consisted of words that were also recorded in the adults' vocabularies. Children learn some words while outside of the home from television, etc., but the majority of words were used by the family. We want to empower parents that they are their child's first teacher. Encourage them to have conversations with their child, asking open-ended questions and building on the responses. The quality of the words also matter. Tier 2 and Tier 3 words are heard more in professional families. Because of further education, types of careers, the families use a bigger variety of words in conversations, and they may read more books to the children that contain Tier 2 and 3 words. These are sometimes called school words. They're the types of words used in textbooks and in school content. Next, let's look at our English learners. A growing need is working with families who are learning English. Some teachers assume by asking the parents to speak in English at home that the child will benefit by hearing English in more settings. However, many adults that are newer immigrants are also learning English, and they will speak mostly in Tier 1 words, the words of social conversation. We want to encourage our English learning families to converse in their first language at home. They will typically use more Tier 2 and 3 words in their first language. If English learners are strong in their first language, those skills more easily transfer to the new language. Why does all of this matter? Word knowledge is required for comprehension of written text and spoken words. The larger the bank of words and word meanings, the more easily comprehension of text will occur. As children read increasingly more complex text, their comprehension will suffer if they don't know and understand at least 95% of the words in the text. Without comprehension, learning doesn't take place. They are simply reading words without meaning. This slide shows in a different format how language development affects the achievement gap. People begin with oral language, what's spoken to them in their surroundings. We build banks of words used in different contexts, and finally, then when we learn to read those words, understanding of what they mean builds. Let's take a closer look at language. If you have a phone that allows for texting, look at some of your text messages. What do you notice about the language? Look how words are spelled. Are there full sentences and good grammar? Next, look at a passage in a textbook or on a handout. Read some of the sentence there. Compare your text messages and the academic language used in the textbooks. What differences do you see? The words that make up our language can be classified into 3 types of words, which are referred to as Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. This is different than tiered interventions in special education. The size of children's banks of words in these tiers makes a difference in their reading comprehension and learning success. Tier 1 words are also called everyday words. These are typical words used in a conversation in a casual setting. We depend on social information to interpret the meaning of words, and we can ask for clarification. Tier 1 words are the words used in very beginning reading books. Most Tier 1 words are learned by listening to family, friends, and teachers speak. These words are especially important for English learners. They are words needed to function more easily in society and in school. Tier 1 words come from Anglo-Saxon roots. Tier 2 words are more precise or unique words. They are not heard as often in daily conversation. However, as in the Hart and Risley study, more of these words are used in working class and professional families' conversations. They come from Greek, Roman, or Latin words. The word cook is a common word, and it's a Tier 1 word. If someone uses the word sauté, a more precise word to describe the way to cook something, that is a Tier 2 word. Teachers often assume students know the meanings of common Tier 2 words used in daily school life. Words used in directions for assignments such as explain or describe are Tier 2 words. Synonyms for Tier 1 words such as speedy, instead of using the word fast, joyful for happy, are examples of words we may assume that they know. Tier 3 words are domain-specific and not used frequently outside of that content. Words such as biology, metamorphosis are science words. Equation and graph are words that occur more often in a math context. Introduce Tier 3 words as needed in the content being read and studied. Anticipate that many students won't know these words. Be sure to work on the meaning of the new words as well as recognizing them in print. Moving from everyday language to academic language is a continuum shown on the next 2 slides. People begin their language growth with informal social conversations and writing for social purposes. Social purposes for writing might be friendly letters or thank you notes. As students are in the school setting, they'll start to use more academic language in discussions such as book clubs and informal writing in journals and personal narratives. Discussions and writing become more formalized in structured academic discussions such as debates and formal presentations. Writing for academic purposes, as in research papers, theses, and dissertations, completes the continuum. Catherine Snow followed children from low-income homes for 15 years. Her study found that by looking at a 4-year-old's language abilities, you can predict with 75% accuracy what his or her language abilities will be as a 7th grader. This is yet another example of the importance of early vocabulary and language development. Teachers need to not be satisfied with the statistic. With intentional language and vocabulary work in each grade, the size of the word gap can be closed, and with that, the achievement gap can be lessened. There are 2 approaches to language development: indirect instruction and direct instruction. Indirect instruction includes having conversations between the teacher and students. Be intentional about talking and listening to students. Introduce Tier 2 words in daily conversation. For example, instead of saying, "You are looking very happy today," try, "You are looking delighted today." With consistent modeling, students tend to begin using the words as well. Another indirect strategy is to co-construct a written text about an activity, sometimes called shared writing, where the teacher introduces a topic and students offer suggestions for what to write. See if they can change more common words to more unique ones in the writing. Encourage discussions between teachers and students, students to other students, and other adults in the school setting to students. More strategies include using rich language and explanations so students see the context of the new words. Provide multiple exposures to those words. Read many books aloud. Choose books with unique and precise words, explaining the words as you go. Call attention to how more interesting the story is with a variety of descriptive words. A great book for this is The Napping House by Audrey and Dawn Wood. Descriptions such as a wakeful flea, a slumbering mouse, a dozing dog, a snoring granny, and a cozy bed are good models of Tier 2 words. Read aloud to all ages of students. They'll be hearing words they might not be reading themselves. Direct instruction is the second approach. Some schools have specific vocabulary curriculum they follow. If your school does not, you need to be intentional about introducing words, Tier 2 and 3 words especially, that they will need to recognize and understand in their literature and content texts. For example, introduce words from thematic units, content words from science experiments, make connections between new words and words they know to help their brains retain them and the meanings. For example, when you teach about the seasons, you might say, "This season is fall." It can also be called autumn. Then be sure to revisit words you've introduced. It takes multiple exposures to words in different contexts for students to read, understand, and then use the words in their oral and written language. As mentioned on previous slides, choose words that the students will encounter in school settings in books at their developmental level, in conversations with people with larger vocabularies. Introduce new labels, not necessarily new concepts. So from our example, the Napping House book, instead of sleeping, they're using the words snoozing and dozing, synonyms. Teach words first for their oral language and then ones to use in their reading and writing. Learning vocabulary is incremental. There are degrees of knowing. Exposure to a new word might be the first time they've heard it, or they may have heard a word before, but they really aren't able to define it or explain it. With more exposures, they can understand the meaning when they hear it, with the goal being that they can use it correctly in context. The reason a student's bank of words with their meaning needs to be so large is that vocabulary impacts comprehension. Let's try this firsthand on our next slide. Look at these list of words. Do you recognize them? Read through them. Now read the passage on the next slide. If the known relationship between the variables consists of a table of corresponding values, the graph consists only of the corresponding set of isolated points. Could you answer questions about this passage? Why or why not? You've probably heard all of the words or most of the words. Comprehension isn't just about knowing or reading the words, it's understand the meaning of the words in relation to the context of the words. You might hear a teacher or a parent saying the student is reading at a 4th grade level because they can read the words in a passage correctly. However, if the student cannot answer questions about the passage to show they understand the concepts, then they really don't know the words. They recognize it, but they don't know the meaning of the words in context. So what implications does this information have for teachers? Use new and interesting words in conversations and in context. Use gestures and facial expression which help to lend meaning and context to the words, which is especially helpful for our English learners. Seeing you smile and wave your arms when you introduce the word joyful helps the child to remember and understand the word. Sing and read poetry and rhymes. Intentionally read books to the students that have tier 2 and 3 words and choose text for students to read that exposes them to new words. For students who already have good vocabulary knowledge, keep stretching them as well. In addition, just as you encourage families to do, keep conversations going by asking open-ended questions and making comments, encouraging the students to do the same. Read from books that have pictures that provide clues to word meanings, which is especially important for our beginning readers. Introduce words that may occur on field trips and review them and use them in writing after the field trip. Provide multiple exposures to words before moving on to new words. Introducing 5 words on Monday where the students write them in their personal dictionaries, copying a definition from a dictionary and then use them in a sentence is not enough. They need to have meaningful exposure to the words over time. If any of you plan to work in childcare settings, become parents, be nannies, etc., where you work with young children, it's important to use this information to affect children in their greatest growth stage. If you are a teacher of school-age children, do all you can to make up for the lack of experiences with language. In their book, Meaningful Differences, Hart and Risley stated, "The most important aspect to evaluate in childcare settings for very young children is the amount of talk going on, moment by moment, between children and their caregivers." This PowerPoint has discussed the word gap seen in young children as they begin school, but it greatly affects older students as they are expected to learn much of content through textbooks and other academic reading. Watch this video clip about a girl named Sarah Lee. You will see how vocabulary that lacks Tier 2 and Tier 3 words affects older students.